Alright, y'all, I got some time on a trip I'm taking here, so I guess I'm going to tell you a tale of my redneck past. Are y'all ready for a tale of redneckery? Here we go. I'm Uncle Ron, and this is an Uncle Ron story. So, about 10 or 15 years ago, I was working for one of those three-letter companies, you know. Had a logo kind of looked like the Death Star. If you know, you know. And so, a buddy of mine and I named Johnny, we got along pretty good. We used to spend our downtime together playing Halo and things like that, you know. So he was a nice enough guy. So one day, you know, we're sitting there during some downtime in between tower climbs, and I'm whipping Johnny's ass all up and down Blood Gulch like I normally did. And Johnny's a little down in the dumps that day, so I asked him what's going on, and Johnny says, well, I got to get this tree out of my yard. And I said, tree? He said, yeah. I said, well, explain. He said, well, you know, a few weeks ago we had a storm, you know, it knocked down a tree in the yard. It was a dead tree. And now my wife wants to have a barbecue over the 4th of July weekend, and I got to get that tree out of there. She's all pissed off about it, and you know, everybody wants too much money. I said, well, shit, I got a truck and a chainsaw. We could probably take care of this thing for you. How big is this tree? He said, oh, it's only about 30 feet or so, but you know, how would we do that? And I said, well, shit, son, I would easily say you and I could handle it in about an hour. So what would it look about Sunday or something like that? He said, well, what would you charge me for something like that? I said, well, thought about it. I said, well, I'll tell you what, you throw me a couple dime bags and we'll call it even. Well, now actually might be a good time to mention that Johnny was also kind of a weed dealer at the time. So we had this arrangement. He said, if you can get that thing out of here by Sunday, I'll give you a half ounce. I said, well, shit, son, what time do you get home from church? So we make an arrangement. Sunday morning, I get up, we put Mary Jane in the car with the boys, take them up, hear a nice sermon, head over to the Golden Corral, eat our fill. And chicken wings were all right that day, not the best. Take them back home, get to Johnny's house about 3 o'clock, and yeah, we chop up the log pretty quick. And I said to him, you know, let's throw it in the back of my truck. And he said, well, what are we going to do with it? Or what are you, actually, I take it back. He said, what are you going to do with it? I said, I am not going to do anything, but we have a plan. He said, do we? I said, yes, sir. So we throw it all in the back of the truck, and on my way into Johnny's, I had noticed a couple times when I'd been up there, he lived in an area where there's a big apartment complex, and out behind it was sort of a ravine that led to just some scrub land. If you live in a city or a suburb, you've seen something like this. So I thought to myself, hey, it's a Sunday afternoon, there ain't nobody over there, we'll just run around the back of one of them apartment buildings, and we will throw this wood in that ravine, and that will be that. So we zip over to the apartment complex, we back up to the ravine, and you know, take a look around, all good, and we start throwing the logs in. We got about our 4th log in when all of a sudden I hear whoop whoop. And now, side note, where I come from and the time I grew up in, cops were not the icons of whatever they are to most rednecks nowadays. I'm more of an old school redneck where cops showing up is rarely a good thing, and you better be ready when they do to use the word sir a lot. But moving back out of the sidebar here, this cop pulls up. I look over at Johnny, who is looking at me as if we are both about to get murdered. And also, remember the weed dealer thing? Unrelated, but I might also mention Johnny is black and we live in St. Louis, so Johnny had a valid concern. Moving on, I look at Johnny and I tell him, relax, son, just let me do the talking, which, to be fair, I think was our only option anyway. Cop pops up, walks over to us. How y'all doing tonight? I said, well, we're doing just fine, sir. How can we help you? He says, well, you know, I noticed y'all were back here doing something, and I was just wondering what it was. I said, well, sir, my friend here and he lives not far away. We got a burn pit, and we've driven by a couple times and noticed a bunch of logs that were in this ravine. We thought maybe we might just take a few and burn them in the burn pit next weekend, make for a nice thing over the 4th of July holiday. Johnny looks at me like I just invented fire. And the cop looks at me with this condescending look on his face and says to me, now, did anyone tell you you could take those logs? I said, well, no, sir, to be fair, they didn't. And he said, and y'all were just going to take them and burn them? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, why don't we just put the logs back in the ravine and we'll call it a day? I said, well, sir, that sounds like a marvelous idea, and I appreciate y'all cutting us a break like this. He said, oh, we're just out here to serve the public. So, in my experience, the dumber the cop, the nicer the cop. Just kind of holds true. And in this case, the guy actually helped us throw the logs back into the ravine. What a nice cop. So there's my nice cop story. Now, there is a couple of postscripts to this story, the most pressing of which is this. We got back to Johnny's house, and we were sitting down to a game of Halo over a cocktail in celebration of our victory over Johnny Law. And Johnny says to me something along the lines, or actually he says to his wife something along the lines of, yeah, you should have seen him talk us out of that cop, man. And it's over there where this guy, I think he said Randy, he said, that's over there where Randy stayed too. And I said, what's that about? He goes, oh, Randy hangs out behind that building, usually on the weekends. I said, well, who's Randy? He said, oh, Randy deals heroin. We're going to file that under information that would have been useful a couple hours ago there, Johnny. So at any rate, if you're ever planning to pull one over on a cop, or at least get away with something on the sly, try not to do it where heroin is typically trafficked. And my moral to the story, of course, would be this. If you're looking to make a sweater, don't be afraid to spin a little yarn. Y'all have a good night.